Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture. Today's episode, Fabulous Penguin.
Okay, cool. Do you want to go first? Will I go first?
Sure, I'll go first this time.
Cool.
My word is penguin.
Ooh. Now, this is exciting immediately because
Okay.
I feel like I don't know what the etymology of the word penguin is, but I feel like I've kind of vaguely looked it up and found that it was interesting, but also have completely forgotten what it was that was interesting.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a good blend.
Do
I like
tell.
that.
I'm curious.
So, yeah, I love penguins. I think most people do.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know where they'd rank on a list of best animals, but they'd probably be fairly high up. Also, just because we're doing an animal word, just another shout out to the Varmints podcast, which is fantastic. And they did an episode on penguins way back in October of 2016. So They've been at that for a while. But this word dates back beyond 2016 to the 1570s.
Oh.
And by all accounts, it didn't always mean the bird that it means now.
Oh, nice.
So
See, I'm already very surprised by those dates because, as far as I'm aware, penguins live in fairly remote, hard to get to places. You know, you think of penguins and you think of, you know, the North Pole, and I was not really aware that people had gotten there in the 1570s. Maybe that's just my ignorance. I'm always happy to hold up my hands to that. But
well, yeah,
cool.
I mean, it is why it took a little bit longer for it to work its way into English. So
Okay.
I believe there's one species of penguin that lives in the northern hemisphere.
Okay.
And that's because it's the Galapagos, and the Galapagos is like just an asterisk of itself for animal stuff.
I understand that all the biologists and all those people are endlessly fascinated by the Galapagos Islands, but it must really have fucked up a lot of lists.
Oh, so many.
So many.
So, other than that one, I believe just one species. They live in the southern hemisphere.
Oh,
and
I
usually,
always
like
get this mixed up. I thought penguins were the North Pole and polar bears were the South Pole. It's the other way around.
Other way.
Damn it.
And actually, just as an aside, that's like Arctic.
Yes. Yeah.
is basically is the land of the bear.
Antarctic is the land of the no bears. We have talked about this before.
Yeah. Dividing the world neatly into two categories, bears and no bears.
I mean, I have to say, it's a fairly important piece of information.
Yeah. No,
Like,
I would like to know that.
If someone was to say to me, here's this area of woods, go forth, explore. Oh, by the way, there are bears. You know,
that's good to know.
My conduct would be different based upon whether or not that last sentence was part of the description.
Right. Yes. And likewise, by the way, there are penguins. I'm immediately excited and interested.
Oh yeah.
And I'm going. But so they're southern hemisphere all over the place. As you say, out of the way spots, which is why it took until the late 1570s, early 1600s for penguin to start referring to those birds down over yonder. But the earliest birds to be called penguins were actually in the North Atlantic.
Oh, okay.
And I keep seeing reference specifically to Newfoundland, but I think towards the end they were in sort of Scotland, Ireland, the coastal areas up there as well. But it is the Great Auk, A-U-K.
Okay, it's a good word, isn't it? Just because
It is.
You don't get many AU words in English, particularly. And it's very satisfying to say. I'm gonna make an assumption that there might be something onomatopoeic going on with the Great Auk, but I don't actually know.
I'm not sure. It's entirely 100% possible, but these are the ones that bore the name of penguin
Nice.
first.
Okay.
Now, and they look a lot like penguins. Like,
Okay.
they're large. They're sort of 2.5, 3.5 feet high. Stand on their back legs with big webbed feet. Short, stumpy, useless for flight wings. You know,
Penguin,
the works.
check.
Black and white feathers. Yeah, they're look like a penguin. They also have these really big white spots on either side of its head that make it look extremely cartoonish and a little bit unnerving. But
I find
anyway,
a lot of birds extremely unnerving. I'm not like
Yeah,
I'm
birds are
not
weird.
frightened of birds. I have a friend who's very frightened of birds, which is unfortunate because she once she woke up one winter's morning ready to go to work and discovered that there was a bird trapped under the bonnet of her car,
oh no.
like actually stuck within the engine, and she was too terrified to make any sort of inroads to working out how it got in there and how to get it out, because she always says that her room 101 would be a room full of seagulls covered in ketchup.
Oh. I mean, that's horrifying either way.
Yeah, I mean, birds are... I'm totally on board with the whole birds are come from dinosaurs, because they're pretty terrifying creatures.
Yeah. Yeah. So many terrifying birds. These ones are, I wouldn't say terrifying, but just slightly off-putting, and definitely look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's a penguin. They're not around anymore. They went extinct in 1844.
I actually did not know that. I don't know shit about birds, Ryan.
So
This is very funny. I said this to Ross earlier on in the week. I can't remember which bird it was, but he'd sort of asked a vaguely intelligent question about birds, as in the difference between one kind and the other kind. And I was like, do you know, I do not know. It's another one of these things. Like, I'd like to be the sort of person who knows about birds, who hears a tweet and goes, ah yes, the greater crested skylark.
yeah.
But I am not. I do not know those things. Maybe I've just been pretending, but I don't know shit about birds. So please educate me further.
So yeah, so the auk went extinct, but that was the first one that bore the name penguin.
Cool.
And then when the European explorers made it to the places where the birds that we call penguins live, that is then they were like, hey, those look like those other ones.
I like that it got a little recycle.
Yeah, I mean, eventually the name was freed up and there was no confusion anymore.
Exactly, yeah.
Womp womp. Etymologically speaking, it is Welsh in origin.
This is why penguin is an interesting word. Cool. Continue.
So it's a compound word. So the two parts are pen, meaning head, and gwyn, meaning white.
Yes.
So
It's all flooding back to me now.
yeah, the idea is the white spots on the head of the auk made it, Welsh sailors call it that. There's a couple of weird little connections here as well. And it's just, anyway. As far as the bits go, the pen we get in British place names like Penzance.
Sure, yeah.
Meaning holy head, and also Pendragon.
Yes.
Like, of King Arthur, Uther and Arthur Pendragon. It's also why William Penn had his name, so that's where Pennsylvania, like the Penn's Woods, Penn's Forests,
Cool.
is from that. And then the Gwyn, that's where the name Gwendolyn, like it's the same root.
Yeah.
And also, sort of this kind of made me chuckle because of the Pendragon connection. It's also where the name Guinevere.
Oh, that is very nice.
So the penguin encapsulates
Both.
all ends of the Arthurian legends. And ultimately, Gwyn comes from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning to see. And so I think the idea is like visible or shining and white light and then gleaming white and then whatever.
Mm. So
that's the etymology behind that. So once the sailors started going around Africa, and trying to find that route, they came across these things. And interestingly, the earliest accounts, like the Francis Drake and Magellan, and the early diary entries of those guys, they just called them geese, the penguins that we
just like
today penguins.
Yeah, geese.
Yeah, I mean,
Super
I guess
cool.
Black and white plumage, a metric crap ton of them everywhere, and there's that. So then the Welsh name stuck because they were like, hey, those look like those other guys. The only other thing I have on penguin is kind of okay. So there should be a klaxon sounding and some sirens because I am now officially out of my depth with all of those words capitalized. Yeah,
Ryan, I feel like everywhere I go, that noise should be happening.
And unfortunately, when I first sort of took my notes, I kind of have like buzzkill in question marks written in the side because, but I don't know that I am killing a buzz. I think I'm just altering a buzz because one of my favorite factoids, and I do mean the oid part of factoid, is that the Chinese word for penguin translates literally as business goose.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever seen this.
Yeah. I love these.
Or come across this. But I've seen it all over the place. Oh, the Chinese word for penguin is business goose. Ha ha ha, they're wearing little suits and all the rest of the stuff. It turns out that's not quite true based on what I could find. Now, most of this comes from a language learning site for Mandarin called ChineseBoost.com.
Oh, nice.
There's a blog post about it, but it was really interesting. So this site says that the first character in the Mandarin word for penguin is goose.
Okay.
Like the goose part, that's true. But the other character in it, and sorry, it's the second character is goose. The first character, it's shared with the Mandarin word for business or like business enterprise. But it doesn't mean business all like in isolation.
Oh, okay.
What it means is standing on tiptoes or to raise up one's heels or
my
kind
God,
of crane
that's
up.
so much better than it wearing a little suit.
It's so much better, right? And it's the idea
the buzz is once again alive. For a moment there was
killed,
a
then
beep,
restored.
but that little trace is just kicked in again. We are good.
So, yeah, I guess the idea is you're kind of looking up optimistically, expectantly. There's a tinge in one of the things I read that was saying like the idea of you're risk taking because you're less balanced if you're on your tiptoes and stuff. So all that stuff plays into the idea of a business stand-up or startup. So yeah, I mean, I don't actually think that the buzz is killed by this for me because rather than being a business goose, it is standing on its tiptoes goose.
Yeah, that's
apparently
perfect. So, absolutely perfect.
Yeah,
that's super cool.
So folk etymology, but there's a bit of Mandarin etymology, I guess. But yeah, so there's penguins, Arthurian legend, North Atlantic, South Atlantic, Southern Hemisphere. Goose on its tiptoes.
I feel like I have to point this out. I have to point out two things. One, the thing that I'm about to tell you about was sort of in my head, but I've also Googled it while you were talking, so that I don't just spout nonsense based upon half fact. Why change the habit of a lifetime, Amy? But what it occurred to me while you were talking that so there's this little known, I don't know how well known it is, like Welsh is a seriously niche language, okay?
Yeah.
And I don't even know where Welsh fits into, like we look at English and Proto-Indo-European roots. Welsh is not part of that situation. It's not an Indo-European language as far as I'm aware. Again, sound that klaxon loud and long, but Welsh is it's sort of like a joke is made about how impenetrably ununderstandable, incomprehensible, that's the word I'm after, Welsh is to people who don't speak it. Yeah. And it's a very beautiful language to listen to.
It is.
And I really wish I knew a bit more about Welsh. But I also kind of feel like if I'm going to get to grips with an obscure sort of non-Indo-European language, it should probably be Scots Gaelic first, just for reasons of patriotism. And I've never bothered to go and actually do that, so it does seem unlikely that, since my lazy ass isn't learning about my own linguistic heritage, technically not heritage, that's a soapbox for another day, but I probably shouldn't then go and put in the hours to learn about Welsh. But Welsh is a super cool language. So there are these, every now and again you get these little stories about, in Wales, road signs are printed in Welsh, and on the road, any markings on the road will be in Welsh. But there was a very funny example of a sign being put up in Welsh that, once it was put up, people started laughing at, and it turned out that the person responsible for what it said on the sign was not a Welsh speaker, and had sent the text to a translator to have it checked, and got a response and wrote the response on the sign. So there's a road sign somewhere in Wales that says "out of office."
Oh.
Basically, so things like this, because the average English or Scots or Northern Irish person has no clue about Welsh, okay? And anyway, it then seems absolutely mind-blowing to me, but this, I swear, is true, and Wikipedia is where I went to for an overview of this topic, that Welsh is spoken in Patagonia, Argentina.
Yes, there was at least one, but I think a small series of illusionist episodes where Helen talks to the people keeping Welsh alive in South America. It's a very cool story.
It's a very cool story. So I won't mash at it because Helen Zaltzman will, I have no doubt, have dealt with it with way better. She'll be way better informed and tell a better story than I ever could from looking at Wikipedia half out the corner of my eye while I talk to you. But Patagonia has a hell of a lot of penguins. And I know that I'm really badly sort of reverse engineering an idea that's happened in my own head, but it is very pleasing to me that etymologically the word penguin is Welsh, given that in that part of the world, there are so many species of penguins. If you want to go see penguins somewhere in the world, Patagonia wouldn't be a terrible place to start.
No. The
other thing that I want to point out, just as an aside about the Patagonian Welsh, is that Wikipedia's introduction to the topic of the Patagonian Welsh uses a word that I've never seen before, and it's super cool. The word is vigesimal, and a vigesimal system is a numerical system in the same way that a decimal system is a numerical system. But vigesimal is a base 20 numerical system, and traditionally vigesimal systems were used in Wales.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there's there's a crossover there. The decimal numeral system used in modern Welsh originated in Patagonia in the 1870s and was subsequently adopted in Wales in the 1940s as a simpler counterpart to the traditional vigesimal system, which still survives in Wales. That's quite lovely.
Wow.
So that
is very cool.
Yeah. Well.
There was one more just little side thing about penguin.
Yeah.
The OED has a separate entry for penguin as a verb.
Ooh.
And that is to have your book published as a penguin book.
Oh, nice.
And I remember I wish I had written down the quotes I meant to, and then by the time I got to the end of my research for this, I just kind of hit print and away I went. But it was 1941, and it was George Bernard Shaw that first brought it up. This is the first citation. But it's really interesting to see how it is used both in a pejorative and honorific way. Like,
okay.
His line is, I've something along the lines of, I've been forced to have Pygmalion penguined. My days as a respectable published author are over, or something like that. Like
I quite love how George Bernard. I'm very fond of Shaw as a writer, as a dramatist, but he was a massive twat. I think he was just incredibly rude, and I think that's part of his genius. But yeah, that's just so arrogant and terrible, isn't it?
Yeah, and then there's other ones that are like, there's other citations in there over the years where it's your work has been published. Now you are a respectable author. You've made it. You've been penguined.
That's beautiful.
I just love Shaw's line on that.
I've been fucking
What
penguined.
a dick.
That's great. Oh wow. A friend of mine tells the story of going to Florida on holiday with his parents and going to some sort of SeaWorld-y Disney sort of place where there were penguins, and the particular zoo animal centre that they were in, it had one of these places where you kind of walk underground and there's a glass tank where the penguins, you can see the penguins swimming about, basically. And his mum announced in tones of great delight, "Oh, I never knew penguins were fish." Just brilliant.
Oh, it's the real life equivalent of the bats aren't bugs thing from Calvin and Hobbes. Penguins aren't fish.
Well, we all know that there's no such thing as a fish, thanks to the wonderful podcast. And
right, yeah.
But I did very much enjoy. I didn't know penguins were fish.
That's amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, so penguin.
Penguins. Well, I'm very pleased by the title once again.
Oh,
it is
super.
good fun going second to know that we're about to publish an episode called Fabulous Penguin.
Oh, I love that.
Because fabulous is in fact the word I'm going to talk about today. Here's
Fantastic.
why.
Okay.
Ryan and I love Taskmaster. If you are not familiar
Yes.
with Taskmaster, it is a British comedy show created from... It was originally a live show at the Edinburgh Fringe, which is highly characterised by irreverence, silliness, and quite a lot of student performers, but also just people doing comedic things in a very sort of rule-free sort of way.
Yeah, agents of comedic chaos.
Yeah, that is a good way to put it. And so from this original Fringe show, it's kind of further developed, and it's now a series it's been on 2 British TV channels. Complicated story, but it's about to start its 14th series, I believe.
Well, and
there's
there's versions all over the world now.
Yes, that's right. It's travelling.
It's crazy
because the format is actually very simple, but incredibly hilarious. So there are 5 comedians or famous people, and they're given a series of tasks to do, and the taskmaster, who in the British case is the incomparable Greg Davies. I just love him so much. Incomparable. As soon as I said it, I wondered if I had it wrong. Anyway, he's fantastic. And like I was saying about Shaw, just there's something really brilliant about wonderfully rude people. And that's the Taskmaster's entire job. Anyway, in the latest series, we were discussing the series, and we were discussing in particular one of the contestants. and I described Morgana Robinson as the mad-eyed and fabulous Morgana Robinson.
Yes.
Speaking
Which is
of
perfect.
Agents of Chaos, just
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I very much enjoyed this series. I've finished it now, so I'll not say anything about that.
I have one left.
You have one left? Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Cool, one left. So, fabulous. It was interesting. And I found myself wondering about whether or not it was one of these words that hasn't necessarily always meant a good thing. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes.
Way back in episode 1 when we heard about nice. And it does seem to be the case that superlative positives, although surely that would be fabulousest. Superlative positives, they haven't always had that meaning throughout the ages. So
it's true.
I was a little bit curious about the word fabulous. And it was one of these words that as soon as I started researching it, I did a massive, oh, of course, because it's really bloody obvious, but it just hadn't occurred to me at all. So, to the OED, as I always, where I always start my journey. Yeah. And it was the OED that alerted me to this, oh, of course, situation Fabulous is, of course, etymologically linked to the word fable, meaning story.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Almost disappointing, isn't it? Almost disappointingly obvious.
Yeah.
And a fable, of course, is defined by the OED as a fictitious narrative or statement, a story not founded on fact. And the first citation for the word fable is around about 1340. And
Wow.
yeah, I was actually quite surprised by that, because I feel like stories are as old as human beings are. But
Yeah.
certainly, we've talked about this many times. In terms of the first written citation, the earliest that the OED's managed to track down has been from roughly 1340. And so, fabulous, etymologically, is quite simply from the word fable, noun, and the OUS suffix. A quick word about that suffix before I get into the fable side of things. This really fascinated me. It hadn't occurred to me in the slightest. The OED has this to say about it. It's used to form adjectives with the sense abounding in, full of, characterised by, of the nature of, whatever it is denoted by the first element of the compound. Okay, so something that is malodorous abounds in malodor, or something that is cantankerous abounds in cantanker. There's an interesting word to think about. Anyway, but the second part of the definition given here is that specifically in chemistry, the OUS suffix is given to the names of elements to form adjectives indicating acids and other compounds that contain the element in question in a lower state of oxidation or with a lower valency than those expressed by an adjective ending in IC. And the examples given here, we have chlorus, which has a lower valency than chloric, as in chloric acid, cuprous versus cupric, ferrous versus ferric, nitrous versus nitric, etc.
Interesting.
I really like the precision of that. I like when science and etymology butt heads, and there is in fact a rule and a system, because as much as I like the lawlessness of etymology, it's nice sometimes to have something, a firm hook to hang your hat on. So I quite enjoyed that little insight into the OUS suffix.
Yeah, I think I might also start transposing just for fun, because we were just talking about...
Yes, I did the same thing.
The Y suffix basically being the same thing. So like having the nature of being a like too, like with feisty. So it could also just be feistus.
Or indeed feistic.
This soup is very spacious. Which I really like. Spicic is when it's really spicy. It's really spicious. It's spicic.
I think from our mangling of these fake words, we can see how they did not endure.
Yeah, I think so.
Etymology in action.
As you were.
So, since a fable is a story, of course, something that is fabulous is fabulous. Now, there are some interesting shades in meaning here, and I thought this was cool. The first citation of the word fabulous is from 1551. And right up until 1864, the citations given refer to this particular meaning of the word, which is of a person or of something that is being personified who is fond of telling stories, given to fabling.
Oh.
So the 1864 citation, Boethius, and our other fabulous chroniclers. So a fabulous poet was a poet who told stories.
Interesting.
And we see that in the 1551 citation. We then see that around about 1616, Shakespeare uses the word in Henry VI, Part 1, where he says, "I see report is fabulous and false." So report, capital R, is a teller of stories. And a teller of stories, this then gets this shade of a liar if it is false. However, there doesn't seem to be anything negative, anything pejorative about the sense. It's just simply that a person who liked to tell stories was fabulous. And then we get the second sense, which is obsolete. a person who was fond of listening to fables or stories was also fabulous. So we have that fabulous age, or those fabulous people. And then we start to see that a fabulous thing is something which is spoken of or celebrated in fable or myth. That's from 1601.
That's where I thought this was going.
Atlas, the most fabulous mountain of all Africa, for example. And then we get the sense of a narrative. And that's essentially an age, a myth, a story that is entirely mythical, that you can't kind of prove any facts about it at all.
Right.
And then we get sense 4. I was really surprised to because of course I hadn't made the connection between fable and fabulous. But we then get of alleged existences or facts, so belonging to fable. So things which because it seemeth but fabulous, we pass it o'er in 1577. So things which aren't really real are fabulous. We then get of a doctrine or an error or an idea based on or originating in fable or fiction. So something was then fabulous if it was if it came from fable, if it came from fiction, if it wasn't true. And then to sense 5, which finally takes us to the sense that I was using when I described Morgana Robinson as mad-eyed and fabulous. We have A, resembling a fable, absurd or ridiculous, which is a rare usage, first in 1561 and latterly in 1853. And then finally, such as is met with only in fable, beyond the usual range of fact, astonishing, incredible. And this is now frequently in trivial use, especially marvellous, terrific, for example. And in the sense that you might say that something was abbreviated fab.
Right.
That TV show's fab. So the first usage of fabulous as in a cool thing from 1609, and you know that is enduring right up until the present day. So fable, a story, actually comes to us from a PIE root, which the PIE root given BHA means to speak, to say, or to tell. Which makes sense, because stories, of course, back in the Proto-Indo-European days of yore, certainly weren't written down, they were told.
Right, of course, yeah.
And this gives us a really brilliant list of cognates. Some where you think, oh yeah, of course, this has to do with speaking or saying or telling, and some which are a little bit less obvious. So we have words like abandon, antiphon, anthem. We have all of the words that use the Greek phone, so phoneme, aphonia, microphone, xylophone, all of those sorts of words. We also have fandango.
Ooh.
Never a bad day when you get to say fandango.
No.
And two words in the list given on Etymonline Online that really drew my attention. One, because I love it and I feel like it's not used enough, nefarious. And
I love that word.
A nefarious thing actually comes directly from two PIE roots. Ne, meaning not, that negative root. And so a nefarious thing is something that is unlawfully said.
Oh, okay.
And that gives us a crime or a wrong or an impious act. So wicked in the extreme. But immediately before that in the list is the word nefandous, which I had never heard of before. Nefandous, which is something which is not to be spoken of, abominable, very shocking to the general sense of justice or religion.
Wow.
Yeah, so absolute
That's a big deal.
Taboo, do not say this thing. Nefandous. I don't know about you, but as soon as somebody says it absolutely must not be done, it's like don't press the big red button.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I immediately started to think about what are the things that you absolutely can't say. But since this is a podcast that people listen to and, you know, there's good reasons for those nefandous rules, I'll probably just keep those to myself. But we also get words like famous, presumably the people that others talk about.
Yeah.
And infantile and prophecy. That makes sense, of course,
Yeah.
and professor, and a whole range of other saying words. The University of Texas at Austin Patagonia Master Index
Right.
list of etymons has a few other interesting ones to add. Particularly the word banns with two N's, which
Oh, yes.
Another word that I really like, the public announcement in a church of a proposed marriage.
Yeah.
And, you know, in many cultures and even in some legal systems, bans must be read in order for the marriage to be, you know, to go ahead legally.
Yeah,
And
it's interesting that I'm not sure that it's still the case, but if it's not still the case in Ontario, it was until fairly recently that you get legally married either by getting a marriage license or by
Okay.
having the banns published and read according to a certain schedule, and you know, spreading the news.
And again, it makes sense that, you know, bans are not just announced like put in the paper; they are spoken aloud.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I liked that one. It was nice. And of course, you have the Fablio. I don't know if you've ever come across Fablio. This is from my happy times many years ago when I was at university. Spent studying Chaucer, and
Yeah, no, I don't know Fabio.
a Fablio is a short, coarse, cynical tale in verse.
Nice.
And if you want coarse and cynical, get yourself to Chaucer.
Yeah, no kidding.
I remember being so intimidated by, I was intimidated by pretty much everything at university, but Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales in particular is a text that's often done at A level, which is the sort of highest university entrance exams done in English schools and some Scottish schools. But I had been educated in the Scottish system, so we use higher, and A levels are slightly different, and Chaucer's often studied at A level. So I was assuming that the largely English students in my year at St Andrews would all be hugely familiar with and experts in Chaucer.
Right.
And I also didn't know anything about Chaucer, so I thought it was, you know, a very serious, lofty tome. Canterbury led me to believe that it might have something to do with the church, and
Right.
and I was expecting a very, you know, a very serious literary read. And then I started reading The Wife of Bath and realised that it was essentially a medieval carry-on.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. So, if you want to tell stories about somebody, you can be fabulous. They can be fabulous. Let's all be fabulous.
That's fabulous. That's amazing. What a great story. It's interesting, and this is sort of a sidebar, but that's kind of what we do.
Yeah.
I was expecting, in my head, a fable has some element of like a moral lesson, or
As in Aesop's fables.
yeah, like I always thought that was just part of the definition of a fable, was like a story not based in fact, but I would have, in my head I would have said, meant to impart some sort of proverbial truth or something. Like I thought that was an element of it that apparently it's not, which is interesting.
Just a story, just a made-up thing.
Yeah.
I suppose it speaks to a time and a tradition where stories were in fact used for that. And you know, if you want to teach somebody a lesson, a story is a good way to go. I frequently observe in real life, real-time feedback, that when I tell my pupils about things that they need to know that are important, their brains go to mode. Whereas when I say to them,
Yeah.
oh, have I ever told you the story about? They're like, ooh.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if it's a story about like my personal life that maybe that they don't, you know, I was telling a class about going to live in Korea and they were like, oh, wow. You know, because I don't know, I think there still sort of persists this idea that teachers aren't supposed to have lives outside of school.
No, you don't exist. You
So-
go into a pod and you stay
Yeah.
there until the next school day.
And so it really fascinates me how there's this almost sort of thrilling power that you have to say, so I've been outside a couple of times, I've done some stuff that wasn't school. Do you want to hear about it?
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to teach a lesson, telling a story is a good way to go.
Yeah.
And yeah, but there, certainly the OED the OED definitions don't contain that shade. But it is interesting that the brand of Aesop's Fable has, isn't it funny to talk about Aesop's Fable as a brand? I suppose somebody would do that nowadays. But it's carried on that idea that you learn something from a fable. Yeah, cool.
Nice. What a fabulous penguin.
Fabulous penguin.
And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.